So first and foremost, I want to thank everyone for joining Tocsin Magazine's The State of Rochester. Tonight, we have Bill Wynne, and he's discussing his new book. We also have Lyndon Gordon, He will be talking about the Family Dollar shooting that happened a few weeks ago. Some of you may know about the story, but he's joining as well. So we are going to start with introductions, and let's start first with Bill.
I'm Bill Wynne, and Shanique invited me. More in my introduction, my background after we go through the rounds here. But I just wrote this book, Understanding and Combating Racism, and Shanique invited me to speak about it. So I appreciate the invitation.
Fred Tanksley. I'm a community member and a community activist, and most of the people I know or have come in contact over the years. So it's going to be interesting, and I'm glad to be here.
Gail?
All right.
Oh, she said Gail.
Okay, I am Gail Fisher. I am a member of the Greece Racial Justice Group, which has now been changed to Greece Ubuntu, and it's gone through another name change. So now we are Rock Ubuntu, folks.
Oh, wow. I didn't see
we are now Rock Ubuntu. We've had another church join our group. So we have 5 churches in Greece and 1 in Gates so far. So we are Rock Ubuntu. And I am here at the invitation of Shanique, and I'm glad to talk with all of you tonight about your issues of the state of Rochester. Thank you.
Okay. Mike?
Hello, I'm Mike Bleeg. I'm with Shanique on the Judicial Observation Board Initiative, Process Initiative, as part of UCLM, and have been doing this kind of work for 20 plus years now.
I'm Jane, Mike's wife. I may need to step out, so I might not be able to participate in the whole session, but obviously I have some opinions about the state of Rochester, and I'm very interested in hearing other people's perspectives. We live in the city by choice.
Lyndon?
Good evening, panel. Good evening, Shanique. How are you? My name's Lyndon Gordon. I'm the uncle of Simron Gordon, the young man that was murdered by the RPD over on the Family Dollar on West Main.
Thank you. All right, so let's start off. We'll talk to Bill and his new book. Tell us a little about the book, the name of the book, and all that great stuff, Bill.
Let me just briefly give you some background about me, because I think it's helpful in terms of understanding the book. I am born and raised in the city. Grew up in the Park Avenue area, worked downtown with Rochester Tel and Frontier. So I've lived almost half my life in the city and worked in the city. Now living in Fairport with my wife of almost 50 years, who's sitting next to me here, Sandy. And we have 3 children and 4 grandchildren. I moved from the business sector to the nonprofit sector for 10 years. I retired from Catholic Family Center in 2014. As my memoir gets into detail about these many community activities. But when I retired, my social and racial activism really kicked in. So before I get into that period, which led me to writing the book, in preparation for this dialogue, I decided to take a question and response approach, Shanique. So I put together some questions and then with my responses, and I thought that might facilitate, the discussion about the book. First of all, the title of the book is Understanding and Combating Racism, My Path from Oblivious American to Evolving Activist. It's on Amazon, and I can give you more details about it if you're interested in getting it. So how did the book all come about? In the memoir, I describe how over the years, the frequency of times I was selected to be in charge of things, like boards and committees, and my personal participation was driven by process and governance versus hands-on. I wanted to change that when I retired in 2014 from Catholic Family Center. So some quick, very brief highlights. There's much more in the book itself. The period from 2014 to 20 was a awakening period, and it involved participation with Rock Acts, a lot of reading, attending scores of programs, developing new diverse relationships, and more. You know, one of the books I read was Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. That had a huge impact on me and my outlook on and what was going on at the time, and continues. Then 2020 hit, COVID, the Floyd, Taylor, Arbery, and here in Rochester, Daniel Prude incidents. I sent out notes to some people close to me about the confluence of these and other events, which resulted in some tremendous negative pushback in the summer of 2020. At the same time, I was being encouraged by several Black and white friends and family to write a book about my racial social justice activism over the last several years. Then in 2021, the rise of the BLM protests, the later the elections, the big lie, the insurrection provided even more incentive. I developed a very rough outline, but didn't really start writing until just after Thanksgiving last year. In March of this year, I decided after 2 drafts and beta reviews that I could consider it for publication, and I was able to secure an editor and a publisher in spring and summer. And so the alpha and omega in terms of timing, with a release date of November 24th, the day before Thanksgiving this year, and it was on the anniversary of my father's death over 55 years ago. So quite an amazing timing of that. The first question I'll get into is your book mainly for other white people? The short answer is no. As stated on the back cover's book description, it provides anyone, irrespective of religion, color, ethnicity, age, or gender, extremely helpful guidance in overcoming frozenness, reticence, and fear of social and racial justice engagement. That said, it is premised on my or one white Catholic male's perspective or voice, and I hope that many whites will not only read it, but see themselves in similar ways through their own lives. However, many people who do not identify as white and who have experienced racism could also gain insights into what it was like to grow up white in a society built on racial hierarchy. You probably have all heard the proverb roughly paraphrased as follows: we do not understand and do not have a basis for judging a person until we have walked some distance in their shoes. The book provides valuable insights for people, I believe, across race, color, religion, that can foster dialogue, understanding, and to hopefully work together in combating racism. The next question: what would people who experience racial injustice and racism get from my book? That the problem of lack of white recognition about racism is much deeper than they think they know, since most whites choose to remain oblivious and silent. I believe that people who experience racism may gain insights of understanding from my book that are very hard to imagine given the complexity and depth of the notions of whiteness, white superiority, and white exclusivity. Also, the experience of being conditioned and habituated from birth into adulthood with whiteness is often exclusionary and always superior is important to understand, as is the conscious and unconscious fear of others instilled from childhood. And again, this is all brought up in the book in terms of my experience. What is the most important thing in Rochester and anywhere in understanding racism and in combating racism? In part 2 of the book, regarding understanding racism, with intentionality, actually wanting to be informed and educated about the history and current reality of racism in this country. Regarding combating racism, I believe the key first step, as portrayed in my experience, is to sincerely get to know people of color and attempt to build relationships. This then could, or hopefully will, lead to allyship and solidarity in jointly pursuing the common good. There are people who say racism is lucrative, a lucrative hot topic, and many whites writing books about racism and social injustice who have never experienced racism are doing something for their advantage, like selling books and raising their public visibility. What do I say about these concerns relative to my book? Simply stated, in my case, all net proceeds of the book sales will go into the fund Sandy and I set up in 2018 with the Community Foundation. This fund is called the Wynne Strauss Fund for Social and Racial Justice, and several small grants have been made to local and national social and racial justice causes. Regarding raising my public visibility, that's a natural outcome of being an author, but I have many people around me on my path who help me sustain a humble spirit as well as inspire me to become even more public. Essentially, since remaining comfortable and silent is widely practiced by whites, I have chosen to not remain comfortable and to not remain silent, despite the cost or pros or cons. The next one is it fair to say that I used to be and perhaps still am a part of the problem of racial injustice and racism? I continue to be reminded that I'm evolving, therefore the use of that term in the title. That said, fairly routinely, things are brought to my attention that I slap my forehead about and say something like, "Come on, Bill." But that doesn't discourage me, since I know it's part of any pilgrimage, especially one that is rooted in blinding whiteness where clarity is still occurring. Am I now a part of the solution? If so, how? By being white versus invisible. By being visible versus invisible, by being vocal versus silent, by being active versus inactive. It is all too easy to simply blend into white comfort. What do you want people generally to take away from your book? That there is nothing to subconsciously, consciously, automatically fear about the other. This is a deep issue that I've observed firsthand with people close to me. Just take one step, do one thing, then let it grow from there with proper nurturing. Attempt to understand your reasons for not wanting to know, being silent, and remaining frozen. Movement from what one person can, what can one person do, to what one person can do. Noting my personal story, among others, of how one American moved from virtual obliviousness to evolving action within an anti-racist mindset. Coming down to the last two questions here. Has faith played a role in your anti-racism work? Typically, I don't talk too much about my faith, preferring to take actions that are rooted in what I believe. That said, absolutely, my faith has played a significant role in many ways. Despite the failures in my Catholic education, it was foundational and provided grounding that later in life led to a spiritual reawakening and renewal. This includes influencers such as Dr. Martin Luther King, Father Brian Massingale, Father Richard Rohr, Father Bob Worth, local diocesan priest, Thomas Merton, Dorothy Day, and many others. As just one result, I am part of a small white multi-denominational group of similarly aged males that meets regularly to discuss the teaching of Father Rohr, including anti-racism topics. In the face of opposition and even failure, what keeps me going in anti-racism work? The important relationships I have built, both black and white, are the key. I also have a hope based on actually observing the resilience and fortitude of Black folks going back over 400 years. When I run into the brick wall myself, I reflect on what I know about the Black experience with the countless number of atrocities, hate-laden encounters, and including even in just trying to get on in their day-to-day lives, yet still hopeful and persevering. And that remains and continues to be truly amazing to me, and where I get my hope. So thanks for listening. I hope this was appropriate for what the program is about, and I'm open to your questions or anything that you may want to add or contribute.
Okay, does anyone have any questions about Bill or about his book?
Bill, I'm really impressed that you were able to get an agent and a publisher in the current era. I'd be curious to know who they are and how long it took you to identify them.
Well, I don't know if I use the term, Jane. I had angels in my path, and one of them was a friend of mine in this Richard Rohr group that we had, who has written several books. So I conversed with him about about just writing in general, and then about taking it to the next step with finding an editor. And he referred me to his editor. I had already been in search of an editor. And those of you who have even explored writing, I know some of you probably have. It's just like anything else. You do a Google on editing or publishing or whatever, and you're going to get a zillion hits. So I typically try and use filters, what I call filters. And this friend of mine directed me to, her name is Krista Hill, and she's based in Indiana. And she did a great job. It took her about 6 to 8 weeks with her own schedule built in with other jobs. And she completed her work in early August. She then led me to a publisher friend of hers. And the publisher I used that eventually, got to and utilized is a company called Pathbinder. And they're also based in Indiana. So there are a number of other things that happen along the way in terms of just getting an attorney to review contract, a person to do a headshot for me and my book, and a website developer. We're developing a website for the book. So a number of different things happened that kind of went, in a way that every time I knocked on the door, eventually an angel came forward. I just call it that. It was just situational, circumstantial, but it was definitely, meant to be in some cases how it did all come together. I had just for, I was talking to another friend about this, and she said how, again, this is another matter of privilege in some cases, because she said, and she's a Black person. She said she had a Black friend who tried to get a publisher, editor and publisher, and it took her 8 years. So maybe that's what you're referring to, Jane, in terms of just the whole thing. I was able to get this done in a year, which is literally phenomenal. When I first started, I thought that wouldn't be a problem, but then I realized that so many different things go into it.
Yeah, I just want to apologize. My phone rang, and so I was just turning it off. That's why I disappeared out of the screen for a minute or two. Thank you, Bill.
Any other questions for Bill?
Hello, Shanique and everyone else. I have a question, but I want to make a comment. Just something for, how you doing, Bill? Something for you to consider. You can respond to it or not. Language, when we're talking about racism and studying racism and really trying to understand how it functions, language is very, very important. So I heard you say several times that there are people who never experienced racism. And I think I know what you mean. You're talking about people who haven't been directly impacted, in a negative way. But everybody within racist societies experience racism. Everyone does. It's pervasive and it's systemic, and you can't get around experiencing it. It's just a question of how you experience it. And we know most white people, in fact, probably all white people, experience it from a position of advantage and privilege and all of that. And of course, Black people and other people of color experience it just in an opposite way. So that's just something to consider, because if we're really going to teach about racism, it's important that we get the language right. If not, we could end up causing more confusion than actually adding to clarity. But you could respond to that or not. But here's my question. As you know, a number of correspondences went back and forth between the two of us about your book, and Shanique saw those, Fred saw them, Mario saw them. It was a whole group of us in the email chain. You said something in one of those emails that I've never stopped thinking about. You mentioned that, and you said this is in your book, until we begin to teach history properly about African-American people, that white folks will remain fearful of Black people, that they will remain fearful, and we won't be able to build relationships. I kind of expressed to you in my response that I thought that was one of the most convoluted ideas I've ever heard, because if anybody has reason to be fearful, it's not white folks. as black folks. And so I didn't understand that at all. And I also don't understand, it sounds like, and this is maybe not what you mean, but if you like, you could speak to it. Sounds almost like the onus to build relationships is being placed on, if not people of color, those who are in charge of the education system, who in many cases are people of color. So, but I don't get it how you kind of, unless I'm not understanding, you're seeing that as some kind of prescription that if people learn the history, now all of a sudden they won't be fearful. We got PhDs, lots of them, who are fearful of black people, and they never knew a black person. So I'm just questioning the whole logic behind that. I don't understand where you were coming from with that.
Well, again,
I'll
I
stop.
can't speak. I mean, you may have exactly what I said, how I can't remember now, but I would agree with you. I mean, but just in terms of fear is fear, whether they're learned or not learned. It's come at me several times, and I'm sure those of us who are white on this call and others, express fear for no particular reason other than being fearful. And so I'm not saying that becoming educated is going to reduce that fear. I think it's a matter of, the way I presented it in the book is growing up in the white world that, and some of you on this call are, that are, maybe most of you that are in this call that are white, had similar experiences. We were blinded in our own ubiquitous nature of the white world. And you can say that we live we understand that now that there's racism, but back then it wasn't even anything that was talked about. There's a program called Sacred Conversations with Rock X, and my wife and I and several others were privileged to participate in the first one, and then we were asked to be facilitators. And Betty Hancock, who some of you may know, she's no longer in Rochester, but she was a big Rock X person. She and I had this exercise, and we sat across from each other. And the exercise was, in 2 or 3 minutes, talk about how racism was discussed in your family and the impact and da 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 da. Thankfully, she went first, because she just went on for 2 or 3 minutes and just explained everything in her background of talking about racism and all the things that those of you who are Black in this call can understand. I looked at her at the end of that and I said, it was never discussed. I have nothing. I almost declared that I had nothing to say, and that's the problem. That whites living in that, growing up in the oblivion, were never, even thought about it as an issue. So I'm probably not doing a good job in answering your question, Howard, or questions. But I think in terms of the fear thing, I understand what you're saying. And in terms of relationships, I think relationships are they're important for the experiential part. And I'm not depending upon Blacks to approach me. I approach them, and then we can build from there in terms of how it goes. And I'm blessed to say that maybe from none to 2 to 3 dozen now over the last 7, 8 years, that I've been blessed to have that experience of having all sorts of Black relationships to one degree or another. Never had that before. I had colleagues, I had associates and all that, but never to the degree that I was able to, with intentionality, with purpose and understanding why, meant to engage and directly engage with many of them, including yourself, as you know. So,
Fred?
Okay. I have I guess a couple comments and a question. One, everybody on the panel, I just want you to think about this. What is mankind's greatest invention? And when you think about that, most people would think of with some physical thing that man has made and produced. But really, in my view, the greatest invention that mankind ever invented was history. And that is the thing that has us twisted with racism right now. Because with history, a stroke of a pen, you can change and make the narrative to whatever you want it to be. And over time, that narrative becomes whatever you intended it to be from the beginning. And that's what we have right now. And there are people that will not let go of that narrative. And that is why racism is so hard to deal with right now, is because nobody white wants to be black. That's just it right there. So if nobody wants to be that, then why is it that we treat those people differently? And we have a lot of people that white that said, well, I don't do anything, or I don't treat people differently. But if you watch a situation and you let it unfold, then you are participating by not participating. And there is no two ways about it. It's like you could go to jail for not assisting somebody that's in peril. But when it comes to racism, you can watch it unfold and not do nothing, and it's okay. And that is where we come as black and white. And no one wants to step across that line to say, okay, stop, this is wrong. And that is going to always be a part of the problem. History, the way it is written, it is almost, I see it as almost, not in my lifetime and maybe my kids' lifetime, will they see the change. It may be put in motion, but the manifestation of it, trying to dismantle that history, I don't think we're going to see it in the next 2 or 3 generations. If we do. And the other thing, Bill, you were saying that white people are oblivious to racism or the acts of it. And I think that's unless you have have no moral compass. There is no way you can tell me whether a person is black or white, blue or green, that if you see somebody hang another person, that you can say that that's okay, that it's right. So I can't see how white people can use that as an excuse that they're oblivious to racism, but unless you have no moral compass.
I'm not saying it's
right and wrong. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I don't think it's, I think it's a situational thing. It's not necessarily an excuse that they won't say they're oblivious. they're just, we're most whites, I can't say all, I mean, but are satisfied and comfortable in not even approaching first base. I would say first base is accepting that maybe there's an obliviousness, but not even getting to first base on the discussion. So it's not an excuse. They don't even think about it. That's a problem for many whites.
But let's be clear, that's not because of magic or happenstance. They're taught. You're taught, white folks are taught that you don't have to pay attention to racism, that racism is not relevant to you, that it has nothing to do with you. You're taught that. You made a statement earlier about beer, white. You said people even on this Zoom can attest to the fact that they have fear for no other reason than being fearful. That's nonsense. They're taught to be fearful. Your parents teach you to be fearful. Your neighbors teach you to be fearful. Media reinforces that you should be fearful because of the negative stereotypes that you're bombarded with every day, every night, every minute, every hour, every second. So let's not be abstract about racism. One of the biggest problems with racism is abstraction. We make it mythical and mysterious. There's nothing mysterious about it. It's taught and it's perpetuated and it's maintained by a white society. It is, clearly. And many, even people of color, feed into it. And I know what Fred is talking about. Let me calm down. I know what Fred is talking about man inventing history. But let's think about that. Man, you don't invent history. Man invented the pen. He invented the paper. He invented the printing press. He invented the computer. He invented the ink. Those are the things you use to record history. But human beings make history. History is what you do. It's your activity. We are making history at this moment. As soon as 2 seconds ago, we made history. It's going out of existence unless somebody records it like I hope Shanique is doing. But history is a record. It's a record of human activity. That's what history is. But I know what you're talking about, Fred. I understand you clearly. But Bill, we got to become more clear, or like I said, we cause confusion when we're trying to teach people about racism. We can't be abstract. There's nothing abstract about it. You are taught to be fearful of Black people, period. You are. That's why. It's not like you're not born like that. You're not born with that fear. It's not natural. It's not inborn. It's part of your socialization process. And so just to be clear.
I speak from my experience, Howard, and you can read the book if you want to, whatever, but I agree with everything you just said, but I think it's more a matter of how. I'd like to hear from Mike or Gail, what they would say, about their white experience, because this is something that's not unique to me.
Oh, I know that. By all means, I hope we do hear from them. And I'm not. See, that's another problem, Bill, is we want to move to anecdotal situations, right? You talked about the Black woman that you sat across from and so forth. There's a danger in that when we try to use these little minuscule examples to like generalize about the broader reality. That's a problem. That also diverts attention from the systemic and structural issues that we need to be talking about if we're serious about impacting racism. I could give you 1,000 anecdotal situations. You could give me 1,000. Mike and his wife can give us thousands. Fred can give, all of us could give each other thousands of anecdotal situations. That doesn't address the systemic and structural racism that's embedded in the very fabric and foundation of this society, in all of its major systems, in its economic system, in its political system, in its quote unquote dominant cultural system, and therefore reflected in each and every one of its major institutions through rules, policies, practices, procedures. That's how racism is maintained. That's what we need to be talking about. The rest of this is rhetoric and noise.
Well,
Okay.
I wrote a book that may be rhetoric and noise, but I hope that those of you who are interested will read it and comment about it. I think it potentially is an important, contribution to the discussion, and I'd like to hear more about it if you do read it.
Okay, so I want to, jump in here. So is there anyone else who has a question for Bill or wants to give their feedback?
Yes, Shanique. I just want to kind of, and good evening, Bill, and good evening to his wife as well. I just wanted to kind of ask him, where does this fear for Black individuals he feel came from?
It's, I think Howard mentioned, you went through a whole litany of it. I think it comes from, the media, contributions to it. You look at the segments in the media, in terms of at least what it used to be years ago. Maybe it's less now, but I can't speak to that because it's not my experience. But if I were in your shoes, I'd say that it's dominated by, what's going on, in the city, and that leads to other, more, that's part of it. It's also just the framework of growing up, like I did, I'm in my 70s now, and but at that time, you just didn't have any exposure to blacks at all. And if you're being told by your parents and by your educators and by other people, to hide your stuff, or don't be careful, don't walk down the street, don't be downtown, or whatever, it brings in, Lyndon, that fear that's there from when you grow up. It's just automatic. It just happens. Now you can get out of that if you want to, and with intentionality, people do. Those of us who are white on this call are doing that, and those of us who have participated in other things over the years are doing that. But I can tell you, the majority are not, and that's why we're at where we're at in this country, like Fred and Howard have been talking about. So I hope I answered your question. But there's a lot of different aspects to that, but it's so present. And again, it's just come to me. Well, I had a relative say that just being fearful for fear's sake of being in the city or whatever. And there's nothing in my mind. We're there all the time. We see it. We know what it's about. There's nothing to be afraid of. But people are.
Okay, so anyone else want to have a question for Bill? Thank you, Lyndon. Any questions? Anyone else want to even give their experience on, we have a few white people on. I know this is kind of a little touchy subject, and Bill, you're handling it well.
Well, again, mine is not an academic treatise. It's my experience, and I felt that it was important to contribute that to the world, let alone my family, and just to let them know, how this came about. Howard and I have had a lot of exchanges over time, and over the last several years. But I got to be careful how I say this, but I've never been challenged by some more so from people that are supposedly close to me than anybody in this experience that I've had. And I said, they don't know me. They absolutely don't have a clue. And that was one of the reasons I wrote the book to if they don't know me, then there's a lot of things that are known. And I figured that it was important to get, my experience out there and what I experienced in my life and how it developed to the point of where I'm at now. I am not perfect. It's evolving and all that. And we're all trying to work through, the language, the history, the so-called fear, et cetera, et cetera. I'll stop there, Shanique. You were trying to,
No, I think this conversation is important. It may be difficult and sometimes hard and, hearing certain words, but it's important to have these conversations, right? We can't be afraid to talk about things that may be touchy. The only way to kind of get through it is to talk about it. And that's why I invited Bill. I knew his book would raise questions. Howard did ask a lot of questions in the email. So I thought, let's put this on, let's have this discussion. And I'm glad we have a lot more white people than I expected. So thank you. Any more questions?
I don't really have a question. I went through my own racial experience growing up. My parents were racist, and I grew up in a very, very upper class white neighborhood. And it wasn't until I went to the south side of Chicago that I began to learn more about the differences and what my implicit bias was as a part of that. But fundamentally, 40 years, 50 years later, even though I've changed and grown, the structural issues that exist in the Rochester community and across this country are so deep that it'll take, I don't know who said it, but it'll take at least several generations for us to make significant change in the racial environment that exists in this country and in this community.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, Fred.
When I made the comment about the how seeing change in a couple generations, I want to speak to the fact that it is not impossible that change cannot start and be made today. If you look at other nationalities that have had atrocities against them, change came swiftly and quickly. And also with that came reparations came as also. But when it comes to African Americans, none of that happened. Let's take with the Jewish community. Volkswagen had to pay the Jews an obscene amount of money for what happened. Levi Strauss has given African Americans not one dime. And the thing about, white people would say, well, that happened way before me. But you are still reaping the benefits of those actions today. And there's been some cartoon characters where it's showing a Black person and a white person in a race. Well, the white person started and they're, almost to the finish line. And then the Black person was allowed to start the race. So you're never going to win. You're never going to catch up because you're already behind. And that is one of the things that keeps this perpetuated. I mean, most whites have generational wealth already being passed down from generation to generation. And so that helps that generation move that much further ahead each generation as they go. That is one of the things that I cannot understand. If we can mandate that people take a vaccine because that helps the American or the global system, you mean to tell me we can't put some things in motion that make sure that racism is abolished? I just find that almost ludicrous that it cannot be put in place. Because if we can mandate that people take a shot, then we can't mandate racism issues and put policies and procedures and those things in place so it cannot happen. The powers to be. When I grew up in Georgia, I didn't have the power to be racist, in my opinion. When I went to the store in our neighborhood, I had to go to the back door, knock on the door, tell them what I want. They would go and get it. I had no thought ever in my mind to ever go walk around and try to go in the front door. It was just not a thought that I could do. And we were told at home, one, you don't look a white person in their eyes when they talk to you. You always say, yes, ma'am, yes, sir. These things we had to do just to survive. And this was as a child and living in rural Georgia. Those are the things that I had to go through on a daily basis, just so that I can continue to breathe. And that's why it's so hard sometimes when you hear people talk about, well, it wasn't like that, or that, I can't conceive that is, trust me, it's true. Even as I grew up, and work, I had a white coworker, a woman, lie on me. And one thing about me, I hate somebody to lie on me. If I did something, I'm going to tell you I did it. I'm going to own it. But she lied on me. The supervisor called us in the room and I laid out everything that was done to prove what I had done and that she lied. When he turned around and looked at her and asked her, well, what did Fred not do? You know, she started crying. And you know what he did? He looked at me. I'm sitting on the other side of the room, and he asked me, what did I do to her? How is that possible? I'm on the other side of the room from her, and she's crying, and he's asking me, what did I do to her? Now the whole issue in the room changed from whether she lied on me to what did I do to her? And we never got back to the fact of why we were actually in the room, that she lied on me. So those are situations that happen, you know, and this just not to me. I'm sure it's just not me. It's happening every single day that we go out to go to work, you know, in different situations. So that's just something.
Thank you, Fred. So we're going to wrap up this conversation. Any final thoughts from someone who hasn't spoke? Because I really want, who hasn't spoken, because I really want to get to Lyndon and have him tell his story about his nephew and the night that he was contacted. Gail?
I just want to talk just for a couple of minutes on the idea of fear, because I'm of the same generation probably as Bill, and growing up was in the same situation as he was growing up. And you were bombarded at that point from comments from your parents, from, you know, people in your society. It was bad. So what I decided myself to do to get rid of this fear factor, encountering Black people, Black men, is the fact that I wasn't going to be afraid unless somebody gave me a reason to be afraid. And I thought the same thing about white men. And I'll give you an example. Halloween night, 9 o'clock at night, the doorbell rings. I open the door. I've got 6 Black boys at the door. I'm there alone. Am I afraid? No, because they gave me no reason to be afraid. I had many older white boys come to the door too. And I really did not feel any differently. If I'm going to be uncomfortable, it would probably be the fact that there were more than 1 or 2 people. But you have to work within yourself and your own conscience to say, look, this cannot be just an instinctive reaction. Sometimes you have to work at it, and I did. And if I go through a Black neighborhood, it doesn't occur to me that I have to lock the door. Now, my husband, he'll lock the doors. And I say, what are you doing? This is crazy. You are not being threatened by anybody. Why are you doing this? So we have to unlearn a lot of biases that we grew up with. So that's all, Shanique. Just end with that.
Thank you for adding that. Definitely. Thank you for adding that.
Shanique, just to let you know, I do have books. I just got them this week. So maybe if anybody's interested or whatever, just work through you, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Again, this is a great conversation. It's always important. And if for anyone, check out the chat. I know Noah was, there was comments in the chat. Thanks again for coming, Bill.
Thanks for having
me. You handled it well.
No, you know, this is an important conversation, as you said, Shanique, and I'm glad that you asked me to participate. So
I don't know, Bill, what your last name is. I did not hear that.
it's Bill Wynne, W-Y-N-N-E.
Thank you.
Yes, I misspelled his name on the.
If you're interested in contacting me, I'm not going to give it out publicly now, but I mean, Shanique has she's got the whole press release and everything else too. So if you're interested in seeing that, so.
Yes, I do.